Dad, do you still have Grandpa's pocket watch? My right hand froze. My wine glass stayed glued to my lips. Across the candlelit dining table, my husband, Marcus Vance, calmly cut our 5-year-old daughter's steak into neat, tiny squares. He smiled. Everyone smiled. The room smelled of roasted pine, buttered potatoes, and festive joy. But under the table, my knees shook. That question was not about an heirloom. It was a distress code. 16 years ago, when I was a terrified 14-year-old followed by a stalker, my father and I created that exact sentence at our kitchen table. It meant only one thing. I am being watched. Someone dangerous is controlling me. Help. I stared at my father, Arthur Miller. He did not flinch. He raised his glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it down with a soft click. I still have it, Chloe, he said, his voice smooth and steady. It keeps perfect time. He heard me. He remembered. To understand how I ended up sending a secret distress code to my own father on Christmas night while sitting next to the man I married, we have to go back to the beginning, to the quiet, invisible trap that took over my life. 8 years ago, I was Chloe Miller, ambitious, sharp, and fiercely independent. I had a degree in accounting, a passion for finance, and big dreams. Then I met Marcus Vance. He was charming, attentive, and deeply respected in Tacoma, Washington. He ran the Hope Care Foundation, a high-profile nonprofit dedicated to helping low-income seniors. He was the local golden boy, praised by the mayor and loved by the community. When we married and had our daughter, Lily, I made a choice that millions of women make every day. I stepped back from my full-time career. I became a freelance bookkeeper, working from a small desk in the corner of our bedroom, managing small tax files while raising our child. I thought I was choosing a family. I thought I was being a good mother. I did not realize I was walking directly into a cage. The abuse did not start with bruises. It never does with men like Marcus. It started with subtle, suffocating control dressed up as love. First came the isolation. Marcus gently convinced me that my old friends were bad influences. Then came the financial lockdown. He managed all our primary bank accounts, handing me a strict monthly allowance for groceries. Then came the cold, calculated psychological manipulation, the gaslighting. "You're forgetting things again, Chloe," he would whisper in the dark, his voice smooth and cold as marble. I didn't forget. I would protest, my chest tightening. I put the utility bill right on the counter. "No, you didn't," he would reply, shaking his head with pity. "You left it in the pantry, just like you forgot to lock the back door last week. Ever since you had Lily, your mind just isn't sharp anymore. Postpartum depression really did a number on your brain." He said it so often, so calmly, that I began to doubt my own eyes. I started writing sticky notes for everything. I checked the locks 3 times. He installed security cameras inside our house, claiming it was for our safety. Every time I tried to speak up, he threatened me with a quiet, lethal smile. "If you ever try to leave, Chloe, my lawyers will prove you are mentally unstable. I will take Lily, and you will never see her again." I was a ghost in my own life, a visible invisible wife. To the world, Marcus was the heroic philanthropist, and I was the quiet, lucky woman by his side. Behind closed doors, I was a prisoner, paralyzed by the fear of losing my child. Tonight was Christmas Eve at my father's historic craftsman home in the Proctor district. Outside, 8 inches of fresh snow muffled the world. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of roasted rib roast, cinnamon, and Douglas fir. Lily sat next to Marcus, wearing a paper crown from a cracker, excitedly explaining why Santa needed to bring her a toy excavator instead of a doll. Marcus laughed, pressing his lips together softly, playing the devoted father to perfection. My father, Arthur, sat at the head of the table. At 62, retired after 32 years on the bench as a county court judge. His eyes were still like gray steel. He processed human behavior the way a camera processes light, instantly, completely, and without sentiment. I sat across from my father in my dark red blouse. Marcus had his hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. To anyone else, it looked like a loving gesture. To me, it felt like an iron collar. 10 minutes earlier, while Marcus was in the restroom, I had caught a glimpse of his phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. A pop-up notification showed an automated wire transfer confirmation from his foundation's primary account to an offshore entity in Belize. Attached was a document scan, a property deed transfer for our 75-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Wood. My blood had run cold. My husband wasn't just controlling me. He was robbing helpless elderly people of their life savings. And he was using his foundation as a front. I knew then that I could no longer just endure. I couldn't just cry in the shower or hide behind sticky notes. I had to protect my daughter, my neighbor, and myself. But I couldn't say it out loud. Marcus monitored my phone, my emails, and my footsteps. So I waited for the clink of silverware to soften. I took a deep breath, looked my father in the eyes, and uttered the secret code. "Dad, do you still have Grandpa's pocket watch?" My father's answer assured me I wasn't alone, but the danger was far from over. 2 hours later, the dinner ended. We stood at the front door as snow drifted down from the black sky. Marcus wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, pulling me close. He leaned toward my father, dropping his voice into a quiet, warm cadence. "Thanks for having us, Arthur," Marcus said softly. "By the way, Chloe's been struggling with her mental health again, lately. Extreme fatigue, memory lapses. I'd hate for a big family evening to set her recovery back. We might take a quiet breakaway soon." I felt Marcus's fingers dig slightly into my hip, a silent warning. My father stepped onto the porch. He looked directly into Marcus's eyes, his face an unreadable mask of stone. "I appreciate you telling me, Marcus," Arthur said calmly. "Drive safely in the snow." Marcus clapped my father on the shoulder, guided me and Lily into his black SUV, and drove away into the white darkness. Inside the car, Marcus looked at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes cold. "Good night tonight, sweetie," he said softly. I looked out the window at the falling snow, my heart hammering against my ribs. The fear was still there, cold and heavy, but underneath it, something new had ignited. I was done being a victim. I was done being the silent, invisible wife. The game had finally begun. The morning after Christmas, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Steam clung to the glass. Cold water dripped from my chin. I wiped the mirror with my palm. The woman staring back was thin and pale, with deep purple shadows carved under her eyes. For months, I let Marcus convince me I was losing my mind. I let him tell me I was forgetful, sick, and broken. But looking at my reflection in the sharp morning light, something cracked inside me. The fear turned into cold, hard resolve. I was done drowning in the role of the helpless victim. I was done crying in the dark. I wiped my face dry, pulled my hair into a tight ponytail, and put on a crisp blazer. It was time to use the one weapon Marcus couldn't take from me, my professional mind. Marcus had forced me to do the secondary tax filings for the Hope Care Foundation. He thought it was a clever way to keep me exhausted and easy to blame if federal regulators ever knocked on the door. He believed my postpartum brain would just sign off on whatever numbers he put in front of me. He was wrong. I sat at my desk, opened my accounting software, and began cross-referencing the foundation's internal ledgers. Line by line, dollar by dollar, my fingers flew across the 10-key pad, the rhythmic clack of the keys echoing in the quiet room. The numbers told a horrific story. Millions of dollars in donations meant for impoverished seniors had been diverted. Fake consulting fees were paid to shell companies in Delaware. Wire transfers were routed through a credit union in Canada before landing in an offshore aggregation account in Belize. Marcus wasn't just a controlling husband. He was a predator, draining the life savings of the vulnerable. That afternoon, I began building my alliance. I started with Hannah Cole, Marcus's 32-year-old administrative assistant. I knew she was terrified. Her eyes panicked whenever Marcus walked past her desk at the office. I followed her to the QFC grocery store on 6th Avenue. I waited until she entered the bread aisle, then slipped into the restroom behind her. The small room smelled of harsh lemon bleach and cold tile. Hannah spun around, her eyes wide with terror. "Chloe, what are you doing here? Marcus is monitoring you, isn't he?" I whispered, keeping my voice low. Her lips trembled. "He has my passport in his office safe, Chloe. I came here on a worker visa. 6 months ago, I realized what the foundation was doing. When I tried to quit, he threatened to report me to immigration for fake violations. He holds my whole life in his hands." I grabbed her ice-cold hands. "My father is a retired judge. We are building a federal case against him. If you help us, we will protect you. I promise you." Hannah let out a shaky breath. She handed me a folded slip of paper. "These are the routing numbers and the admin access codes for the primary offshore account in Belize." Next was our 75-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Wood. She was a gentle widow who baked cherry pies and watered her hydrangeas every morning. The night before, I had seen her name on a deed transfer document on Marcus's phone. I visited her under the pretense of dropping off Christmas cookies. Her living room smelled of dried lavender and old paper. On her coffee table sat legal documents Marcus had brought over, claiming they were routine tax relief forms. I scanned the fine print. It was a fraudulent power of attorney transferring her home to a company Marcus controlled. "Evelyn," I said, holding her hands, "he is trying to take your house. We are going to swap these pages." I pulled out a blank duplicate form I had printed at the public library. Together, we replaced the signature pages. When Marcus's notary collected the packet later, he walked away with meaningless paper. Evelyn squeezed my wrist with fierce gratitude. "Thank you, my dear." By Thursday evening, I had compiled everything: ledgers, routing numbers, and forged contracts. I saved all the files onto a micro SD memory card no larger than a fingernail. Now, I needed a hiding place, a place Marcus would never think to look. I remembered my father's advice: the safest hiding place is the one the enemy is too arrogant to inspect. I went to Marcus's private office while he was out on a donor call. On his mahogany desk sat his prized possession, a heavy brass trophy, the Philanthropist of the Year award. He polished it every Sunday with a velvet cloth. Using a small screwdriver, I loosened the felt base of the trophy. I slipped the micro SD card inside the hollow brass pedestal, tightened the screws, and set it back on his desk. He would look at that trophy every day, blind to the evidence buried inside it. The next morning, the front doorbell rang sharp and sudden. I walked into the foyer just as Marcus opened the door. Standing on our porch, in the freezing drizzle, was a process server handing him a thick white envelope. Marcus opened it. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed into 2 slits of black ice. "What is it, honey?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and tremulous. Marcus turned to me, his smile entirely gone. "It's a temporary restraining order from your father." He pulled out the court document. It listed Marcus as the petitioner, claiming my father, Arthur Miller, had sent threatening text messages. Attached was a statement signed by Thomas Reed, a disbarred attorney my father had reported years ago. The order prohibited my father from coming within 500 feet of Marcus, our house, or any event Marcus attended. Marcus stepped close, his breath cold against my ear. Your father thinks he's clever, Chloe, but he just cut himself off from you and Lily. If he steps near us at the Fairmont Olympic Gala this Saturday, he goes to jail. I looked down at the paper, pretending to shrink back in fear. But beneath my trembling eyelids, my mind was crystal clear. Marcus thought he had isolated me. He had no idea that every move he made was pulling the trap tighter around his own neck. The morning after Marcus served the restraining order, I did not cry. I did not hide under the covers. Instead, I woke up at 5:30 a.m. I laced up my running shoes and stepped out into the freezing winter air. The cold wind bit my cheeks, and my lungs burned with every breath. As my sneakers pounded the snow-covered pavement, I felt the dull numbness in my limbs give way to sharp, electrical energy. I was no longer running away from my life. I was training for my freedom. After my run, I washed my face, cut my hair into a sharp shoulder-length bob, and put on a tailored navy dress. I looked in the mirror. The hollow, terrified girl was gone. Standing there was Chloe Miller, sharp, grounded, and dangerous. I drove to a secure parking garage near the federal courthouse to meet my father. Because of the restraining order, we could not meet in public or at home. But Arthur Miller was a 32-year veteran of the bench. He knew the law was not a shield for criminals. It was a weapon for those who knew how to wield it. Inside his sedan, the air smelled of black coffee and old leather. My father sat behind the wheel, his gray eyes piercing. Marcus thinks he trapped me with this restraining order, my father said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. He believes isolating you makes you weak. He does not understand that you are my daughter. He pulled a manila folder from his briefcase. I have been in contact with Special Agent Laura Vance. She leads the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Seattle. They have been watching the Hope Care Foundation for 8 months, but they lacked the internal paper trail. What you found on that micro SD card gives them everything. Can we arrest him now? I asked. Not yet, my father replied firmly. Washington state operates under a strict two-party consent law for wiretapping. Any secret recording made without a court authorization is inadmissible in court. If we move too fast, his lawyers will throw out the evidence, and he walks free. He leaned closer, holding my gaze. Agent Vance applied for a federal court-authorized recording order this morning. Once the magistrate signs it, every word Marcus speaks near you will be courtroom-ready evidence. But until then, you must act like the obedient, frightened wife. Everything must look normal. My father reached into his pocket and handed me a small black burner phone. Use this only to receive encrypted signals from Vance's team. Marcus doesn't know about it. I don't exist in your phone logs. I took the phone, feeling its cold plastic surface against my palm. I understand, Dad. One more thing, Chloe, my father added softly. We ran his facial recognition through the federal database. Marcus Vance does not exist prior to age 27. He stole the identity of an infant who died in Montana in 1982. His real name is Julian Mercer. He stole $6 million from an elder care fund in Nevada, staged a boating accident on Lake Tahoe, and altered his face. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I hadn't just married a greedy man. I had shared a bed with a ghost, a professional predator who built a life on top of a dead child's name. Over the next 48 hours, I lived a double life. By day, I smiled at Marcus. I poured his coffee, packed Lily's lunch, and pretended to flinch whenever he raised his voice. I let him believe his restraining order had broken my father's spirit and left me completely helpless. By night, While Marcus slept, I studied the operational plan Agent Vance sent to my burner phone. I memorized the floor plan of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. I mapped out the security cameras, the service elevators, and the emergency stairwells. Marcus was planning his final exit. Under the cover of the Saturday night gala, he intended to trigger a master wire transfer, moving $2.3 million from the foundation's accounts into his Belize shell company. Right after the event, he planned to drag me and Lily across the Canadian border, keeping us as permanent hostages so my father would never dare expose him. He thought he had planned for every variable. He thought he was the smartest man in every room he entered, but his arrogance was his fatal blind spot. He forgot that the woman he dismissed as mentally unstable was the one tracking every single penny he stole. On Friday night, 12 hours before the gala, I stood by the window in Lily's bedroom. Outside, the rain washed away the dirty snow, leaving the dark pavement glinting like black glass. Inside, the room smelled of baby powder and fresh cotton. Lily slept peacefully under her pink blanket, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythmic breath. I reached down and gently brushed a strand of golden hair from her forehead. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single vibration. I pulled out the black burner phone. A text message from my father glowed on the screen. The federal judge signed the recording order. Vance's team is in position. I trust you, Chloe. Be ready. I stared at those words for a long time. 2 months ago, I would have trembled. I would have cried in the dark, praying for someone to come save me. But as I looked at my sleeping daughter, the last remnants of fear evaporated into thin air. I closed the burner phone and slipped it into my drawer. I stood tall, taking a deep, slow breath that filled my lungs with cold certainty. I was no longer afraid of Julian Mercer. I was no longer the victim. The trap was set, the court order was signed, and tomorrow night I was going to tear his gilded world down to the ground. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel glittered under massive crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with expensive floral perfumes, roasted tenderloin, and champagne. 300 guests moved across the polished floor in tuxedos and evening gowns. High above, silk banners hung from the balcony, bearing the gilded emblem of the Hope Care Foundation. At the center of the room stood my husband. Marcus Vance wore a navy tuxedo, tailored to perfection. He moved through the crowd, effortlessly, shaking hands with donors and radiating a warm, magnetic charm. To everyone in that room, he was a living saint, a visionary humanitarian who gave dignity back to forgotten seniors. I stood at his right shoulder in a silver gown. My hair was styled in a sharp bob. Beneath my collarbone, taped securely under my dress, sat a microscopic microphone authorized by a federal court order signed 30 hours prior. It captured every breath within a 12-foot radius at courtroom-ready quality. At 8:15 p.m., Marcus leaned toward me, his breath smelling of red wine. "I need to check the final pledges in the 4th-floor suite," he murmured softly. "Stay here. Smile. Keep Mayor Williams entertained." "Of course, honey," I said, my voice smooth and dutiful. He turned toward the elevators. I waited 45 seconds, counting my heartbeats. Then, I excused myself and took a service elevator up to the 4th floor. The corridor was blanketed in crimson carpet that swallowed the sound of my heels. The noise of the party below faded into a distant hum. I walked quickly down the hall to Suite 412, pulled out a master keycard Hannah Cole had provided, and swiped it. The lock clicked green. I slipped inside. The private suite smelled of old leather and polished mahogany. On the desk sat his prized possession, the Brass Philanthropist of the Year award. I moved swiftly to the desk, pulled a screwdriver from my clutch, and unfastened the felt base. My fingers touched the cool plastic of the microSD card. I pulled it out and slipped it into my palm. Looking for something, Chloe? A quiet voice echoed from the doorway. I froze, then slowly turned around. Marcus stood by the closed door, his hands casually tucked into his tuxedo pockets, a cold smile resting on his face. He locked the door behind him with a soft click and walked into the room. He didn't yell. He picked up the brass trophy from my hands and set it down with a heavy, resonant thud. I've known about your little Christmas code since the moment you spoke it, Marcus said softly. A pocket watch. Your grandfather's heirloom. It took me 10 minutes to search your father's trial transcripts. A clever distress signal. Simple and elegant. But once you know to look for it. I kept my hands at my sides. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs, hitting the hidden microphone, but my face remained an unreadable mask of stone. You think you're clever, Chloe, Marcus continued, stepping closer. You think your retired judge father and your accountant friends are going to ruin me? There is an automated email queued on a server right now. If I don't punch in a security code every 2 hours, that email sends automatically to 47 journalists across Washington state. He leaned in closer, his eyes sparkling with cruel satisfaction. The contents are a forged dossier detailing how your father accepted bribes on 6 major cases. It includes signed affidavits from Thomas Reed and fake bank records. He will die in a federal prison, disgraced and stripped of his pension. He touched my chin with his thumb, forcing me to look into his eyes. You belong to me, Chloe. You and Lily. Tonight, after I execute the wire transfer at midnight, we are driving north across the border into British Columbia. You will be a dutiful, grateful wife in Vancouver. Forever. 2 months ago, I would have broken. I would have dropped to my knees and sobbed. Instead, I looked straight into his dark eyes, lifted my chin, and smiled a cold smile. You think of everything, don't you, Julian? Marcus flinched. The calm smile on his face vanished, replaced by a sudden, razor-sharp silence. What did you call me? He whispered. Julian Mercer, I said, my voice ringing clear and steady. Former CFO of Silver Harbor Elder Relief in Nevada. Stole $6 million from dying retirees. Staged a boating accident on Lake Tahoe. Stole the Social Security number of a dead infant born in 1982 to become Marcus Vance. Marcus took a step back, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure fury. You think you're untouchable, I said, stepping toward him. You're just a small, pathetic parasite who preys on helpless 80-year-olds. You poisoned Eugene Martinez with fake vitamins. You forged power of attorney documents for Evelyn Wood. You blackmailed Dr. Ross using her son. Tell me, Julian, how much did you steal from Mrs. Ward before she died? She was incompetent. Marcus snapped, his facade cracking completely, his voice rising in sudden rage. Her son took a payout. I managed those assets. I built this foundation with that money. They were dying anyway, Chloe. I took what they didn't need and built an empire. Every word, every admission, every arrogant confession poured directly into the hidden microphone under my collar, beaming straight to Special Agent Laura Vance in a surveillance van 3 blocks away. You're nothing without me, Marcus hissed, his face twisted in raw malice. You're just a broken, hysterical housewife. Suddenly, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. A red alert light on his laptop screen began flashing. Across the hotel, the internal security feeds went to static. Down in the corridor, heavy tactical footsteps began echoing against the carpet. Marcus pulled out his phone. A notification flashed. The master offshore wire transfer to Belize had been flagged and frozen at the Canadian intake node. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. He realized in one terrifying second that he hadn't been controlling the room. He had been auditioning for a federal indictment. He lunged forward with explosive violence, grabbing my upper arm with an iron grip. "We're leaving. Right now." He yanked me out through the suite's rear service door and shoved me down the concrete emergency stairwell. We skipped steps, my heels clicking loudly on the metal treads, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He dragged me out into the subterranean chill of underground parking, level P2. Parked near the loading dock sat a black Ford F-250, its engine idling with a low rumble. Behind the wheel sat Thomas Reed, his disbarred attorney, his face pale with panic. "Get in the truck," Marcus snarled, shoving me toward the rear passenger door. "Get in, or I swear I'll call Reed's contact and leak the dossier on your father right now." He yanked open the rear door. Sitting on the back seat, pale and shivering, was my 5-year-old daughter, Lily. Reed had picked her up from the babysitter an hour ago as insurance. "Mommy," Lily cried out, her small voice echoing in the cold garage. "Lily." My voice broke, but my body moved with pure precision. Marcus grabbed my shoulder from behind, trying to force me into the cab. "Get in, Chloe. Move." I didn't panic. I remembered every cold morning I spent running in the winter air. I remembered the self-defense drills. I dropped my center of gravity, planted my heels on the concrete floor, and slammed my elbow backward into Marcus's solar plexus. He gasped, air exploding from his lungs, his grip loosening. I twisted my wrist inward, breaking his thumb grip, and kicked down hard onto his right knee. Marcus dropped to one knee with a harsh curse. At the exact same instant, Thomas Reed slammed his foot on the gas pedal to flee. The heavy truck's engine roared, and immediately died with a metallic clunk and a hiss of black smoke. 2 hours before the gala, while Reed's truck was parked in the public lot, I had opened the fuse box under the hood and pulled the main fuel pump relay. The engine had burned through the residual fuel in the lines and stalled completely. The driver's door burst open. Reed scrambled out to run, but heavy tactical boots slammed onto the pavement from every direction. "FBI, don't move. Hands on your head." Special Agent Laura Vance and 8 armed federal SWAT agents burst through the stairwell doors, tactical weapons raised, laser sights cutting through the dim garage lights. "Julian Mercer," Agent Vance shouted, her voice cutting through the garage like thunder. "Remove your hand from your jacket slowly and step away from the vehicle." Hearing his real name shouted by federal agents in a cold Seattle garage broke whatever was left of his mind. Julian Mercer stood slowly, his hands shaking, his face pale as a corpse. He raised his arms and placed them flat against the cold concrete pillar. An agent slammed him against the pillar, pulling his arms behind his back. The sharp double click of steel handcuffs echoed loudly off the concrete walls. I didn't watch him get cuffed. I didn't care about Julian Mercer anymore. I sprinted to the open truck door, reached inside, and pulled Lily into my arms. I dropped to my knees on the cold concrete floor, burying my face in her neck, holding her so tightly our hearts beat as one continuous rhythm. "I've got you, baby," I sobbed, tears finally spilling down my cheeks, hot, free, and unstoppable. "I've got you. You're safe. We're free." Julian Mercer was marched past us in heavy handcuffs, surrounded by federal agents. For a brief second, his eyes met mine. There was no charm left, no intelligence, no control. Just a hollow, empty shell of a man going to a dark room for the rest of his life. I held my daughter tighter, stood up on my own 2 feet, and walked toward the light at the garage exit. The federal trial lasted 4 weeks. In the quiet courtroom of the federal building on Stewart Street, smelling of old paper, cold marble, and polished mahogany, Julian Mercer sat at the defense table. He still wore a tailored gray suit, but his shoulders slumped, his confident posture gone, his magnetic charm entirely evaporated. The jury returned a unanimous verdict in under 3 hours. On every single count, wire fraud, money laundering, aggravated identity theft, RICO violations, obstruction of justice, and kidnapping, the foreman read the exact same word: guilty. The federal judge looked down from the bench with cold, unyielding eyes. Julian Mercer, alias Marcus Vance. For a decade of calculated, predatory destruction against the most vulnerable members of our society, you are sentenced to 48 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The wooden gavel struck. A sharp, final crack echoed off the high walls. Julian did not look back. He was led away in heavy leg irons through the side doors, a ghost disappearing into the dark. Because he had committed the crime of bigamy, maintaining an active, undissolved marriage in Nevada under his real name, the family court in Pierce County declared my marriage to him legally void ab initio. It had never existed in the eyes of the law. I didn't even need a traditional divorce. Lily and I were completely free, with full, undisputed custody. The Federal Financial Recovery Team moved quickly. Thanks to the digital records Hannah provided and the offshore account routing codes I had unlocked, Special Agent Laura Vance's team froze the accounts in Belize within 4 hours. 94% of the stolen funds, over $2.1 million, was recovered and returned to the elderly victims and community trusts. Evelyn Wood kept her home. Hannah secured her U visa, her future in America safe and bright. 6 months later, the cold Washington winter melted into a brilliant golden autumn. It was late afternoon, during the magic window known as the golden hour. The sky over Tacoma was brushed with rich amber, warm orange, and soft violet. I stood in the center of the backyard of my father's craftsman home in the Proctor district. The air smelled of damp earth, sweet fallen maple leaves, and fresh cinnamon bread cooling on the kitchen windowsill. My father, Arthur, stood near the garden beds, wearing his old canvas barn jacket. He held a heavy brass watering can, gently pouring water over the roots of winter roses. A few feet away, my 5-year-old daughter, Lily, laughed out loud as she chased a red paper airplane across the green lawn, her golden curls bouncing in the warm sunlight. My father reached into his pocket. He pulled out a heavy, polished metal object. He walked over to me and placed it gently in my open palm. Grandpa's pocket watch, a 1924 Hamilton Railway special, 17 jewels. I turned the cool metal over in my hand. For 11 years, it had remained stopped in a drawer, saved not to track the passing hours of the day, but to measure the resilience and silent courage of our family. Arthur smiled gently, his gray eyes bright and clear. "It's time to wind it up, Chloe." I opened the back casing, took the small brass crown, and turned it. A soft, distinct mechanical sound filled the quiet air. Tick, tick, tick. The watch was running again. Time was moving forward, not as a prison, not as a terrifying countdown, but as an open horizon of pure opportunity. I slipped the watch into the pocket of my jacket. I looked across the lawn at my daughter, then out past the white wooden fence toward the street where the golden sunlight danced across the trees. I took a deep, full breath. The lingering shadows in my chest vanished, swept away by the warm evening breeze. I was no longer the invisible wife trapped in a cage of psychological terror. I was no longer a victim waiting to be rescued. I was Chloe Miller, a survivor, a mother, a woman who had faced the dark and rebuilt her world with her own hands. I raised my hand, shielded my eyes from the glorious amber sun, and smiled. The storm had finally passed, and the rest of my life had just begun. All shadows must fade before the truth, And every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below so we know we're walking this journey together. Hope to see you on the next page.